Hello and welcome to Champ Select, your go-to competitive Legends of Runeterra podcast. I'm Alex. Joining me as per usual are my two co-hosts, Noble.
What is up?
And Hugh.
Hello.
In this episode, we're going to be talking about the current meta. This is Cosmic Creations patch 2.00, and we're hoping that this episode is kind of your one-stop shop to the meta right now.
Halfway through the season.
We're about halfway through the season smack dab. So we're going to take a quick catch up and just talk about the actual game itself. I know it's been a little bit of time. We've been talking about, broad concepts, the holidays and all that. It's been a little while since we've just gotten to sit down and just talk about what the average player needs to know about
what cards are good in this card game.
What's actually good.
Play.
Yeah.
What should you be doing?
I think we've got quite a lot to go over. We started out, we wrote ourselves before we've recorded. We started by writing out a group collective tier list. So we're going to go over our group collective tier list. Probably going to break down each deck, why it's there, the various builds we've seen of the deck, a few random play notes for each deck. Hopefully, what people are looking for when playing against the deck, what you're looking to do if you're playing as the deck, if we have any particular insights, that type of thing. And we're kind of just going to go through it all. Yep. So I think without further ado, let's just start off.
Yeah. Real quick, I did want to say, I think we're probably going to do a more in-depth meta episode, closer to the seasonal tournament.
Oh, certainly.
I'm thinking back over, preparation for last seasonal tournament and us, compiling spreadsheets of win rates of all the decks and which 3-deck things work. So this is kind of a touch point for what all these decks look like now. We're not anticipating new cards before the seasonal tournament, except Aphelios, which is kind of throwing a wrench in it.
Could change things, but probably won't significantly shake up the meta.
Yeah. It's not like a whole card release that will have cards that go in multiple archetypes. You'll be an Aphelios deck or you won't. I think we should just start at the top of our tier list. Do you have anything you want to add here?
No.
Let's just get right into it.
Yeah, no.
We organized.
Yeah, go ahead and explain the tiers.
Yeah, we organized. First. Yeah, yep. S tier. We see these as the decks that are kind of the collective best decks. They are level 1, so to speak. They are the decks that we expect people to be on the most often, and to have the best win rates.
To be clear, I think we think S decks are the best decks.
The best decks. Yeah.
If you want our advice as to what you should play ladder with, just as a blanket general answer, the decks that we have in our S tier are going to be the first answers that we give you, and it's not that we don't think the other decks are
before any other I'm seeing a lot of blank. It's S tier decks are
just go play them. Yeah, basically,
pretty much.
And
and we'll also get into why if you're worried about, but I'm also seeing these other things. We'll get into that.
Yeah. And then we have A tier. So our A tier consists of decks that we think are good and decks that we would lump into the these decks are good and you should play them and you should be prepared to play against them. We just don't think they're quite as ubiquitous. Maybe they have a few more shortcomings than the S tier decks. Perhaps their actual meta alignment essentially just lines up a little bit worse right now. So there's some decks that are really good at some things and bad against other things, and that's just not quite in the right place right now. So they're A tier instead.
Yeah. Then B tier is, honestly, we started out with having most of these B tier decks in the A tier, and then we realized that we kind of wanted to separate them out a little bit. And B tier decks are the main difference between them and A tier decks is they might be a little less consistent or a little less well positioned right now. So I'd be a little more surprised if I played against them on ladder than I would if I played against A tiers. So it's not only frequency of play, it's just also do they have good matchup speds right now? Do they have good matchups against the best deck? Theoretically, in a vacuum, an A tier deck and a B tier deck could be the same power level, but right now the B tier deck has a worse matchup against the other A tier decks and the S tier decks.
So it's in B tier.
Yeah, so it's in B tier.
Absolutely.
And then C tier are decks that we honestly would recommend against playing right now.
Yeah, I think that there's just no reason to play a C tier deck instead of one of the higher tier decks for the most part.
Yeah,
unless you're looking to you just hit Diamond 4 and you're I can't lose LP right now.
If you're looking to have fun or experiment or anything, obviously you can play whatever you want. But yeah, for the points of our tier list, probably should steer away from anything that's C tier or heaven forfend below.
Yeah. We have 17 decks between S, A, and B tier, so it's not like this is a card game where the tiers are very wide, and there are a lot of decks like that. Whereas
absolutely.
There are Magic metas when I think there are 2 S tier decks, 3 A tier decks, and then 4 B tier decks, and don't play anything else.
After that.
Yeah,
for sure. So, anything you want to add here, or are we just good to dive right in?
Yeah, let's just dive right in. Let's do it.
So I think that a great place to start is just smack dab at the top of S tier, where we placed Lisa and Zoe.
Yeah.
That's probably not going to come as much of a surprise to any of our listeners. I've been really on this deck for a long time. We have I keep hearing success stories of people who are climbing into the very high masters with it. I keep hearing success stories of people who are climbing through gold without really losing games in platinum or whatever. Like,
there are like 5 copies in the top 10 in masters right now, which is not the best indicator of a deck, but it's a good one.
It's just so I've heard so many stories from every ladder bracket about this deck consistently winning, like gaining people a lot of LP. I think it's the best deck. I think that the only reason it's not in a tier of its own is because it just so happens to line up somewhat poorly against some of the other against another S tier deck. I think that's the only reason why it is not in a tier of its own.
Scouts, right?
Scouts, to be more specific.
Just checking.
Yeah.
So Grand Plaza Scouts
is our second tier.
Yeah, also known as Grand Navigator on Mobalytics for some reason.
Yeah, so
because it plays.
I know Island Navigator and Grand Plaza. It's a cute
wonderful
name.
So yeah, so initially my S tier is only Lee Zoe, but Scouts has a good matchup against it and is good against the rest of the field, and as such, I think found its rightful position in S tier alongside Lisa and Zoe. So let's talk a little bit about those two. We have a third deck in S tier that we'll go into a little bit later, but I think we're all in agreement that these are probably the 2 best decks. I think that if you want to play ladder, you should pick one of Lee Zoe or Scouts and try and get really good at it and play it a lot.
If you're looking to
hard climb.
Yeah,
exactly. That would be my best advice. And I want to talk a little bit about why do we think these decks are the best. So I talked a lot about Lisa and Zoe and its powers, and I even wrote a very in-depth article that went on Reddit a couple weeks ago at this point that went over a lot of the reasons why I think.
Is that only 2 weeks ago?
It might have been 3 or 4 at this point.
I honestly don't know.
It's been a little bit, but there's a Reddit post that you can find in the description of a previous video, episode 5, I think.
Also, if you just go on r/LOR competitive, it shouldn't be that hard to find.
Absolutely.
If you're looking for it.
Yeah. So I want to focus on Scouts more than I want to talk about Lee Zoe because of that. Yeah. So I think that Scouts is an S tier purely because it has turns that just kind of feel unfair. Like, I think that's the reason it's the only aggro deck where I really feel like that. When they play the Grand Plaza on turn 3 and then Island Navigator on turn 4, it feels pretty unfair.
It feels like cheating every single time.
Yeah.
And the fact that they can line up, like, it's not just, there are plenty of decks that have really, really unfair feeling turns, particularly Grand Plaza decks. But a lot of the other Grand Plaza decks, in my experience, have one particularly unfair turn. And then they sort of like have also like strong turns, but not ones that just feel oppressive further on.
What are some examples
of other ones that don't feel?
No, of the what turn are you talking about? Because for Scouts, it's the Grizzled Ranger turn almost always in my opinion.
The island. I think it's the Island.
I think it's the
turn.
Island Navigator turn.
Sure,
turn. But those are the same turn.
Yeah,
because they're both turn 4.
Yeah, so it's the turn 4.
It's the turn 4.
Island Navigator is, I think, potentially worse, but also harder to disrupt.
I think it's a silence. I think there's an argument there. I kind of think it's better, but it's that's up for debate entirely. That's more of a against certain decks. I think Grizzled Ranger's better.
Okay, so then
the fact that we're arguing which one is more broken is kind of a key piece to why it's really strong in general. So there's so much. The thing about Scouts is that almost all of their cards are so good when you play them with the Grand Plaza, and it's the only deck that tries to combine the Grand Plaza with lots of cheap creatures, and that's the big difference that I think people, and he was trying to like verbalize, was that a lot of the Demacia Grand Plaza decks feel like they have a good turn and then like a few just like doing things,
and then
turns
they keep
that
doing
end up
their
good.
thing, but
and that's probably because they have a lot more high mana cards. So they're more deploying one threat a turn every turn instead of multiple smaller bodies that really start to feel like cheating. I think the most like cheating turn you'll get out of those decks are the like turn 4 where they're like 4-drop that gain 5/4 that gains life steal, as well as a 2 mana a 2-mana creature that's, giving a bonus egghead researcher or whatever, and then like single combat your thing too. Like those turns feel unfair because they're playing multiple spells, whereas Scout's turns are almost always that. They're almost always deploying multiple spells on the same turn that they have their Plaza in play, so they always feel unfair.
So real quick, does that deck play Cythria? Does Scouts play Cythria? Big Cythria? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So that is the only card that costs more than 3 mana that doesn't have 2 bodies. Like Quinn and Island Navigator and Grizzled Ranger all double proc Grand Plaza in different ways.
Petty Officer, they're playing that.
Oh, and Petty Officer.
I've seen a few copies of that.
I think it's 2. I like 2 personally.
Well, I think that Petty Officer in particular has a different home from the deck. I've been playing mostly a Scouts version that was playing Pool Shark and Fortune Croaker.
Those are the big differences.
And there's some big differences, but really like these card choices seem kind of minuscule because the core plan of Grand Plaza on turn 3, stupid 4-drop on turn 4, you're so far behind now. Just tends to happen every game, and those are the games that feel unfair.
Because every single one of their 4-drops is a 2-for-1.
Or like a 4-for-1 with the Grand Plaza, usually.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of times where they go like Grand Plaza into their Island Navigator or something, and then they also kept the 2 spell mana from turn 2 to play the blind.
Play a bird, play Valor.
And then, similar stuff can happen with Challenger and MF, where you can kill a bunch of 1 toughness creatures and get a lot of attacks in, but, they're not quite as good as the Grand Plaza turns, but that's kind of the
Yeah, there's a lot of absurd turns with the deck, basically. It really capitalizes on its mechanic, like Scout and the Grand Plaza, just the mechanic Scout and the Grand Plaza synergize innately so well together that, it's giving buffs for 2 attacks instead of 1, and the synergies really pile up.
And then all of it's great with rallies, and then it just all
builds, and it's all great with MF, and it's all great with Quinn, and your units are cheap and efficient, and there really aren't very many stinkers in the deck. There's no hand where you draw with Scouts. Okay. There's not none, but there are very few hands that you draw with Scouts where you're like, this is awful, I lose, right? Like, and those hands are like double Chain Vest, Cythria, and like a single combat or whatever. And even those you can draw out of,
there's so much in your deck that can draw out of that. But
it really doesn't get much, like, you don't really see very many of those hands, right? Like, there's just not that many dead cards in a vacuum in the deck. The deck has a very good proactive plan. It's very good at executing it, and it makes turns that feel unfair in the process. So all these things coupled together, I think that this is a solid S tier deck. It's hard to attack. Even the decks that attack it can often lose to their explosiveness. If you have a really, really good hand, it feels hard. It feels impossible to lose with the deck, basically, which is actually, I think, almost true of all of our S tier decks. I think all of the S tier decks have hands that feel unbeatable.
Yeah, I agree with that, actually. It's a good way to put that.
Lee Zoe is similar.
Yeah, Lee Zoe is similar. Do we want to talk a little bit about Lee Zoe just very briefly?
Yeah, I mean,
as well. Yeah, go ahead.
Probably should. Yeah, I mean, on the point of unbeatable hands, usually for Lee Zoe, it looks something like I attack with Zoe on turn 1 plus cards.
Yeah, it's like turn 1 Zoe and 3 random.
Turn 2 Mountain Goat into some decks.
Yeah, and even turn 1 attack on the play, attack with Zoe, the attack token. Turn 2 bank your mana. Turn 3 play Eye of the Dragon and 2/2 cost spells, making a 2/1 on your next attack turn, or making a 2/1 on your defensive turn, but also getting to play Star Chart and stuff like that. I don't think we need to talk about these.
Yeah,
I think we're going to talk about these decks more when we talk about other decks, and I think so I think we can move on to
for sure. I do really quick want to note that Go Hard got nerfed as well, and a slight decrease in the Go Hard play rate will help out the Lee Zoe deck as well a little bit.
I do think Go Hard was S tier before the nerf, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. So that deck no longer being an S tier,
I
think is a big boon to the deck as well.
And then a deck kind of at the top of A tier and bottom of S tier that I think we decided to put in S tier is Draven Swain.
Yeah, this is the third one we decided to put in S tier. This one's definitely a gap. I think there's for sure a notable gap between Scout's Lee Zoe and the Draven Swain deck. I think the reason why the Draven Swain deck found its way into S tier are twofold. First, for me, is TF Go Hard got a nerf. So with the nerf of TF Go Hard, I feel like this deck basically kind of claimed its spot in S tier.
Go Hard got worse, so Mystic Shot got better.
Yeah, essentially. Go Hard got worse, Mystic Shot got better, basically. That, and this is the only deck that I can consistently beat Scouts with. Like, I think this is the only deck that truly is favored against Scouts which is the other reason why it crawled up into S tier, I think. So similar to why
you mean of the top tier? Like there are definitely other decks.
Oh yeah, you can build a deck that beats Scouts, but like this is the deck that I think
Not
best
a deck
beats
that
Scout
also
that
beats
isn't
other things.
that also wins other games.
Yeah,
This
exactly.
is I think the best deck that you can play to attack Scouts.
I have heard
why
the
it's here.
general opinion that Lee Zoe is actually even to favored against Scouts from some high level players, but
Yep.
that's very different when you're just like playing in Platinum to like the top of the Masters ladder.
Yeah, absolutely, and
I do think Lee Zoe has no bad matchups.
it could easily have no bad matchups. Like, and the more we see the deck, we might end up at a point where we realize that it's no bad matchups. And the Scouts thing the Lee Zoe and Scouts matchup has very much been like, it's been played a lot lately. So I suspect we're going to get some really good data very soon from
About that,
Riot about that exact matchup, and we'll be able to see pretty obviously who was right. You know, maybe it has no bad matchups. Maybe Scouts is slightly favored. Maybe slightly favored feels like a bad matchup because it's the only deck's bad matchup, and it's like 52-48 or whatever.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, even if Zoe Lee is a slight dog to Scouts and slight up on everyone else, it's still
it's easily
the
S
best
tier.
deck.
Yeah, it's easily S
And I
tier.
think that deck is likely going to see a nerf, and I think the card the Grand Plaza is likely going to see a nerf soon. But
we'll get into that later. Yeah, I think for sure. So that rounds out our S tier. Is there anything else anybody wants to say about S tier?
About
we want to talk
about this
more.
Draven Swain deck.
Yeah.
I think we just really quickly need to say Swain is a huge upgrade over Ezreal.
Oh yeah. Swain is a big upgrade over Ezreal.
It is way better at ending games than Ezreal is, even though Ezreal, like, it's harder to remove a large Swain. It is, and then the Leviathan provides a lot of redundancy and just closes out the game so often. It just got better at turning the corner, and that's where it is.
Yeah, the deck's much better at turning the corner, which moved it up into S tier. I do not think as Draven is S tier, for example.
Yeah.
But I do think this.
And also, it
variant is.
gave it a more resilient late game. Yeah. Like you can actually just stun lock.
Yeah,
the board.
you became way less reliant on like random drawing Tri-Beam Improbulator early and having it make a huge creature.
Yeah, this deck does all of the good things that the Draven Ezreal deck used to do for the most part, except instead of killing you with Captain Farron and a bunch of Decimates, it's now killing you with the Leviathan and locking your board. And it turns out it's much better. It's much better right now.
Ezreal did kill a decent amount of the time, but like,
yeah, it killed a reasonable.
You
amount
still
of time,
needed
but-
like. The thing is, if your last card is Ezreal, it is not going to kill your opponent. If your last card is Leviathan, your opponent will die.
Absolutely,
that's kind of where it's
and
at.
that's a big change essentially. So I think that means let's move down into A tier.
Yep.
So A tier, to reiterate, A tier are our decks that we think are good, decks that we think are good choices to climb the ladder with, and decks that we think absolutely have a place in the meta. They just aren't S tier. So these are decks that we think you should absolutely try to find room for in your gauntlets, decks that we think you should be playing on ladder if you're familiar with them, decks that we think you should audible to if you have a good read on your particular meta. So like I think that S and A tier are your quick list of decks that you should have like in your window. Like I've played against a lot of blank, I'm gonna whip out this, right? Like is basically where I put all our A tier decks.
All right, so I think that they are. We came up with Ephemeral, which is Lucian Hecarim, the Grand Plaza Ephemeral deck. Fiora Shen, which is the classic Fiora Shen deck. TF Gohard, which is relatively unchanged, playing a couple more interesting cards since the nerf. Like sometimes I've been seeing Wiggly Burblefish. I saw like Make It Rain. I don't know how good those are, but like literally the exact same deck
Basically
list
the same
is
deck we're all
probably
used to.
reasonable.
Yeah.
They Who Endure,
Endure aggro.
aggro, which is playing Shadow Isles and They Who Endure, and the like low drop package of like Bark Beasts and Hapless Aristocrat and that kind of stuff.
It's mono SI plus They Who Endure.
And They Who Endure, yeah, basically. And then Grand Plaza Targon decks. So like the Demacia, the larger Grand Plaza Targon decks usually play like Celestials and A Soul. And,
Yeah, they usually have Aurelion Soul in them.
yeah, and then some combination of like Zoe,
Garen, Leona,
Garen,
something like
Leona.
that. Absolutely. That's the end of our A tier?
Yes.
All right. So let's go back to the top and let's talk about them all individually. So
all right,
let's start with that list. So Ephemeral is one that we like among ourselves actually had one of the most disagreements with when we were making this tier list. Like the S tier we all like solidly agreed with. Like we were all like, these are the two best decks. There's a little bit of a gap, Draven, Sway, and we were all like, yes. When we got to A tier, we started having a bit more of a discourse about what things we thought should be A tier and what things we thought should be B tier.
Yeah, I want to pop in real quick with just like a side note before we get talking to these specific decks. Is like this is from a pretty narrow snapshot point in time, and from the perspective of 3 people that have been playing like some of these S and A tier decks. Like we definitely haven't all played all of these decks, and we also haven't seen data from Riot about win rates yet.
Yeah, this
recently.
is a feel thing.
So this is definitely a feel thing, and I think we're gonna get a lot more. We don't have a lot of hard information to go off of because of like the point in the season we are, and this is kind of just where we feel we should be at.
I agree. So aggro endure.
Or no,
Sorry,
ephemeral.
hyper ephemeral. So we're going to start with ephemerals. Ephemerals. Yeah, go ahead.
This is an example of one of those decks that has a really good early Grand Plaza turn. It is powerful in that it can do it with spell mana, so it can do it on turn 3 when you play the Grand Plaza, and can play, what is the card called?
Either Haunted Relic or
Stalking
Shadows?
No, Stalking Shadows is the draw.
No,
spell.
not Stalking Shadows. It starts with an S. It makes 2/2/2s.
Onslaught of Shadows?
Onslaught of Shadows. He's correct.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
I believe it's Onslaught of Shadows.
Yeah, just the one that makes 2 of Hecarim's Horse Boys.
Yeah, they're both 2 mana slow spells. One makes 3/1, one's ephemeral, and one make 2/2/2s ephemeral.
Yep, both for 2 mana.
Absolutely. So this deck tries to play Lucian and then play the Grand Plaza and one of those, basically. Usually. That's the dream.
And hopefully a Shark Chariot somewhere along the way.
Yeah. And hopefully you can just do it all. You can have all 4 things die, they all get Challenger, hopefully they're all eating something. It's essentially maximally abusing the Grand Plaza with ephemeral units that are made in great numbers in order to have like very swingy turns.
And then Hecarim does this at the top end too.
Yeah, and Hecarim does this at the top end. So the general play pattern for the deck is like, do nothing, maybe play a random dumb 2-drop, either it's Lucian, maybe it's Shark Chariot, something like that. Yeah. And then on turn 3, we're trying to cast the Grand Plaza, and then one of those spells to enable.
If you have the attack token. If you don't, you want to play the Grand Plaza, wait, and then use your 7 mana.
Absolutely.
To have a really good turn on turn 4.
So it's either aiming to have a really, really good turn 3, 4, or 5-ish, basically, and then a really strong turn 6 or 7 with the Hecarim turn, and then cast a Harrowing at the end. So for me, I think that this deck exists like right on the line between A and B tier. I think that it's barely an A tier, but I think that it feels to me like a deck that's on its way out the door into B tier, into a deck that resides in B tier, and it's not perfect for the meta.
I haven't been seeing it as much. Zoe Lee has its advantages against it, and the mechanic Scout is really good against this deck out of the Scouts deck, because you can like open attack, and then they can like, you open attack with your Scouts, you still have the attack token, and then they like play some ephemeral blockers, and then you can just like pass.
Yeah, absolutely. They basically can't block.
The deck's bad at blocking, basically.
Yeah.
So
being able to
Scouts are quite good.
Being able to attack twice is really good. Hugh, you disagreed. You believe this deck was quite good.
I thought this deck was better than you two thought it was. This is mostly I've been playing against this a lot on ladder. It's shown up. It's one of the. I've been playing against like 3 different decks on ladder recently, and it's mostly this deck, and then Scouts, and then weirdly enough, finally this is not the case, but for a while it was Teemo Sejuani. A lot of
Teemo Sejuani.
So much Teemo Sejuani, but not anymore, thankfully. But the deck just feels, I don't know, maybe I'm just playing against it wrong, but it just feels fairly strong. It's very explosive, and maybe I'm getting bad variants. Maybe because maybe they're just always seeing their Lucian. Like there's a lot of things that this deck can do, similar to Scouts. There's a lot of hands. There are hands it can have that feel unbeatable.
Yeah, there's a lot of A plus B.
Those hands as often as Scouts does.
It's a lot of A plus B. It's like Grand Plaza plus Ephemerals, or Lucian plus Ephemerals, or a leveled up. The difference between a leveled up Hecarim and a not leveled up Hecarim on turn 6 or 7 is huge.
Yeah,
and stuff like that.
There's a lot of and the reason it's definitely not S tier is because, like Scouts is because it needs more things to line up than Scouts does. Scouts can do It can either just have MF and do its thing with scouts. It can just have Grand Plaza, do its thing with scouts. It can have neither of those things.
Go
and
Quinn
still,
into Cythria and still
exactly,
have very
and still
powerful
just
turns.
make a big board that also utilizes the scouts keyword.
I think the big difference between this deck and scouts for me is that at the end of this deck, the Lucian Hecarim decks, like very impactful turn, it's going to end up with usually 1 or 2 units in play.
Yeah.
And ideally those 1 or 2 units is like a leveled up Lucian. Right. Whereas with scouts, in those game breaking turns, they still have, this random 1-drop with scout a lot of the time, this random 2/2 with scout.
Just a bunch of creatures.
And just another
an MF.
and like an MF, right? Yeah. And whereas it's much harder to catch up against that than it is with, all right, you did all that thing, I took 12 damage, you leveled up your champion.
My guys died.
And now it's my turn. Okay, Ravenous Flock your Lucian. And now I have 2 or 3 creatures and you have none, right?
Yeah.
Right. And it feels much easier to catch up from their incredibly high power turns than it does against the Scouts deck.
Even if these busted turns are better.
Yep.
Exactly. So that's for me why I think this deck is not as good as Scouts. It needs to do that. It does do it pretty consistently. But you really play these games out against this deck is what I've found. Because like a lot of the time when I play against this deck, this is the type of deck where I just open up my concede button on like turn 3 or 4. I'm like, this game is over. And then I'm like, I'll play it out. And then 2 turns later, I've won. This happens to me the most with this deck than any other deck in the game.
I
this
agree
deck
with that for sure.
like makes you want to concede on turn 3 or 4, and if you just play it out, a lot of the time they just like don't get there. Yeah. So that's my recommendation is play it out against this deck. If you're looking to play this deck, make sure you're mulliganing aggressively for your explosive turns, because without explosive turns, the deck just basically does nothing. So you need to make sure you find explosive turns, be they Grand Plaza or be they not Grand Plaza. And I think let's move on to the next one.
Fiora Shen.
Fiora Shen.
This is kind of also a note. This is like a random order, basically. It's just
we didn't order within tiers. We just placed them into tiers,
we didn't.
So.
Don't take this as like we put ephemerals first, so it's the best, and Fiora Shen second, so it's the second best. Let's not.
You want to start with this one, Noble? I feel like you've played.
I've played a lot of this deck. I've basically the 2 decks that I've been recording my win rates with on this patch are Fiora Shen and Zoe Lee. Like I'll pop over, play a couple. I'll play like 3 games with another deck, go 1-2, and then go back to Zoe Lee to like make up the loss. And it's happened like many times. I feel like if I had only played Zoe Lee, I would be in Masters already, and I'm in like Plat 1, which just tells you how much I've been screwing around with other decks and how insane my Zoe Lee win rate currently is. I'm something like above 60% for sure. I've played a good amount of Fiora Shen. I'm like 6-1 with the deck on ladder, but then I've also played it in multiple gauntlets, and it's been like the best thing in my lineup both times. Fiora Shen, very powerful deck. We've made some changes to the deck recently that have boosted it from kind of where it was last season, cutting Fleet Feather Tracker. I think we talked about this literally last episode, but then adding things like Relentless Pursuit and like Spirit's Refuge instead of Riposte has made the deck just more solid all around game plan. It's really the same deck. It's Fiora plus Challengers plus Shen, River Shaper plus Barriers, Fiora plus Barriers, any of those moving pieces.
Yeah, so for anyone who's unfamiliar with this deck, it really eats aggro decks alive in general. Yeah. That's kind of been its claim to fame throughout the course of its lifespan.
It's definitely a mid-range deck.
It's a mid-range deck that eats aggro decks alive, basically.
It also feels like a control deck.
It feels like a mid-range combo control deck.
Yeah, which can be solidified into
those.
like a mid-range leaning tempo deck, because tempo is defined as like aggro
control.
Yeah, so regardless of what you define it as, it beats aggro decks. So its place in the meta right now, I think, is beating Scouts mostly. And it does pretty consistently do that.
I've found it beats Ephemeral pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got really good matchups against basically anything that's trying to get your Nexus dead. So I think that just that spot in the meta means that it's pretty much always either going to be like high A S tier ish, like unless aggro is completely unplayable.
Yeah,
for whatever reason.
See a world where it will be.
Yeah, is going to take quite a bit of convincing to get there. This deck's probably never going to leave A tier at the very least. So like this deck is such a great deck to put hundreds of hours into and become a real master at, because it's really hard. There's a lot of great decisions that can be made. Mulliganing is really important. Knowing what your plan is in any given matchup is really important. It's not always Fiora, right? A lot of people think that this deck's primary plan is always Fiora.
4 ticks on Fiora, but
yeah, that's not true at all in a lot of matchups.
this deck is a Shen deck masquerading as a Fiora deck.
Yeah,
in my
actually.
opinion. Like, Shen is very powerful and one of the largest parts of winning games, because if Fiora's eating a creature every turn and you have to spend a spell to protect her every turn, you're going even instead of Shen, which is, creating you advantage the whole time. I also think that something that's interesting about this deck is that it has some really weird random polarizing matchups. Like, outside of being generally very good against aggro, it's really good against Feel the Rush, and then very bad at killing the card Lee Sin, and very bad at interacting with what Ash Sejuani's doing. So those are 2 random matchups that are both mid-rangey combo decks, and Feel the Rush also being a mid-rangey combo decks, and it's very good against one, not great against the other 2.
Yeah, so if you like this deck before, keep playing it now.
It's really rewarding to play.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, go hard.
Go hard. All right, this one
The old boogeyman.
This one I think is definitely one that we're going to have to take a little bit of time for. So I think the Go Hard very obviously used to be an S tier, right? I don't think any of us are sure how hard this Pack Your Bags nerf really hit Go Hard, right? So I think that any of us are sitting here thinking, I don't think any of us were confident putting it in A tier, right? None of us were this is an A tier deck now for sure. I think it could easily be an S tier deck still. I think it could easily be a B tier deck now. I would struggle to see it being a C tier deck, but
I was leaning closer to S than to B personally, and yeah.
How about you, Noble? Do you think that this is an SA B tier deck?
Yes, and I just haven't played with it or against it enough recently to be sure.
Okay, cool. I think that it's probably an A tier. This is a pretty reserved placement here. The deck got nerfed. It used to be really good, so we took it down a tier. I think that there was a sharp decrease in play rate, and we're just going to have to see numbers on this deck anymore to really have a good idea. I think that anyone who plays the deck can say it plays very similarly, or whatever is going to be the main review from most people.
It has worse late game turns because you can't double spell with Go Hard.
Yeah,
or with Pack Your Bags nearly as much. And
how many games does that actually lose you though? Because I think that's a very hard thing to tell, which is what I'm getting at here. Is I think that the feel of the deck will generally feel S tier still, probably, except you're probably going to lose games that you wouldn't have lost before, and you might not even realize it. So how many of those games really exist? Is the deck actually that much worse, so it needs to be moved down a whole tier? My assumption is that this will move it from S tier to A tier. I think that its win rate will go down by at least a couple %, and that'll put it into A tier instead of S. Anybody else have anything they want to add to that?
Not really. No. I mean, it's just like you said, it feels pretty much the same, and we really just need some time to let this nerf sit around and have people play the deck more.
Yeah, for sure. It's a little bit too new.
And maybe tune the list a little. The list has been getting altered slightly now.
Yeah, I've seen a little bit of wiggly burblefish floating around.
I honestly think that. So the burblefish thing is a point of contention amongst everyone we know.
Yeah, it's true.
I think the card's fine. I don't think the card's outright bad. I think it's because it's a 3/1 elusive. It's gonna kill you if you don't kill it.
That card's so weird. There's so many random Twisted Fate Burblefish decks that just exist now, and I feel like it's a fan favorite thing where it's I've got this wiggly Burblefish and I've got this Twisted Fate, and everything will be okay.
Yeah, because
it just doesn't work. It doesn't work at all.
Speaking about cards that are good against wiggly Burblefish, Twisted Fate.
So here's clearly my take on the wiggly Burblefish.
Yeah, I don't think the card's particularly good, but I don't think it's unplayable by any means, and I really like the idea of killing someone with a wiggly burblefish.
Yeah, see, I think people are in love with the idea of killing people with these free wiggly burblefishes that generate them a card.
It's so fun to say.
Yeah, that's why I keep saying wiggly burblefish.
It's a 3/1.
It's a 3/1 elusive.
When was the last time you killed anyone with the Trickster?
With wait, what?
The 3-mana 3/3 elusive celestial
all
card.
the time.
Really?
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
have that experience.
I don't have that I cannot remember the last time I like killed someone with just a random 3-power elusive thing.
Oh, that's I've come to a lot of games where I'm like, oh god, how do I win this game? And then all of a sudden I realize, like, wait, they're at 7, and I have the Trickster, and
She's gonna hit 'em.
I have a Pale Cascade. Like, we can do this. Like,
Yeah, you're
All right. Speaking of Pale Cascade, I think the next on our list is Grand Plaza Targon.
Grandpa's Targon. This one is sweet. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna say this is sort of like we said before, it's an amalgamation of, like, we sort of lumped together all of the various
Big
kind of builds of, like, some combination of the champions: Zoe, Leona, Garen, and Aesol.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you're playing against a lot of mirrors, Aesol's going to be better. If you're playing against a lot of, and also Zoe, and then more mid-rangey Garen and Leona.
Yeah, the
Because those are
particular,
generally the builds that you see all of them playing Grand Plaza, but some combination of those champions.
the particular build that I liked the most was Zoe and Aurelion Soul,
Same.
personally.
Got to polarize that curve.
Yeah, it was really good. Well,
Is
basically,
it 3 and 3?
yeah, it was 3 of both, and having Zoe just made the deck feel more functional in early turns without, and it's not like I really ever felt like I needed an extra champion in the 4 mana slot to be able to do powerful things on turn 4. I never
There's
had
just
that
such a
problem.
glut.
There's so many 4, 5, and 6 mana things in your deck that you just do not need to worry about having
The
extra
Unordinary.
more powerful things,
Yeah.
right? Like just being able to play something on turn 1 and then a star chart on turn 2 and maybe a 0 mana creature along with it or whatever. Just being able to play more spells, I felt like was a big thing the deck needed. But in general, I think these decks are quite good, like very good. Actually, I think that they have a really good spot in the meta. They go way over the top whatever anyone else is doing.
Absolutely.
So if you're playing like these Draven Swain deck, this is a pretty rough matchup. Same if you're trying to play Go Hard in any capacity. Pretty much any mid-range control deck is just in a world of hurt. I found this deck actually has a pretty good matchup against Scouts too. And it doesn't even really just fold over to discard. Like the addition of the 4 mana 5/4 with Lifesteal, Daybreak Lifesteal, is big for this deck.
And also a huge reason that you don't need to play Leona or Garen.
Yeah, absolutely. Is a big upgrade for this deck. I've won games against like even just like a discard aggro where I queued up and like saw discard aggro with this deck and I was like, I am dead. Like there's no way I'm not dead. And sometimes you just like play a Zoe, play a 2 mana, play a thing on turn 2, like it's an Egghead Researcher, whatever. Just play the Ground Plaza on turn 3, and then boom, this thing that's going to attack for 6, gain me 6 life, eat their champion, heaven forfend if I have a single combat too.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
Yeah, exactly.
Or another one of them or whatever, right? Like it's really very effective at regaining just enough life to live and get to its late game where it's going to just slam you in the late game with these huge cards. With
Solari
all have
Sunforger.
Challenger. Solari Sunforger.
There we
thank
go.
you.
I've been thinking the moment you said the 4 drop, I was like, I know what that card is. And I was like, wait.
Can't remember the name of it. Solari Sunforger. Thank you. I think this deck's quite good. I think that it's absolutely an A tier deck right now. I don't think it's S tier. It's not quite consistent enough for that.
I agree.
I don't think. But this is a great meta call. If you just like keep losing to stupid mid range, like you can just whip out your Aesol and show them what's good.
Yeah, this deck is like going to beat Draven Swain.
Yeah.
It also gets to play Hush, which is something
it
nothing
also
else
gets to play
besides
Hush.
Zoe Lee in our S and A tier gets to do, and Hush is a very powerful card.
Yep.
We've talked about it numerous times. I don't think we need to again, but
Yeah.
it's great at beating random nonsense like the Endure aggro deck. I actually think one of the reasons this deck is between A and B tier is because They Who Endure is not very good right now.
There's
The
a lot
card.
Of,
The card.
There's a lot of Hush. Just the card Hush is getting played.
And Zoe's making Equinoxes that just makes
Yeah.
it look
Exactly.
not particularly good.
Yeah, essentially. And, there's a lot of vengeances and all that still floating around as per always. So I think that this deck is good. I think that it is A tier. I think that it has a great attack on specific metas. I think that it's just powerful enough to just win games sometimes too. There are very similar to a lot of the other decks. There's just some stupidly unfair turns with this one, but it's very aggressive. The unfair turns in this one are not, turn 4, play this Island Navigator, eat your board. They're like
It's
turn,
like turn
1.
3.
It's more like turn 1 where they're like, or turn 2 where it's like you
Cursed
play this
Keeper.
Cursed Keeper, eat it with a Ravenous Butcher, or on turn 1.
Which like it's like Bark Beast, Cursed Keeper, Ravenous Butcher, 10 power on turn 2 attacking.
like that's not fair.
I think-
That's an unfair turn. too.
I think turn 2. I think turn 3 is its scariest turn personally. With turn 1 Bark Beast, turn 2 Curse Keeper, turn 3 Blighted Caretaker.
Oh yeah,
swing for what is that? That's 1, 6,
million,
10, 13.
13.
That's no, and I think it's more than 13.
No, it's
you
13.
Get 3 2 1s, a 4 3,
The 3/3.
and the 3 3. Yeah, okay, yeah, 13.
But still, lots of powerful things. I think it is also clear that if this particular deck could play the Grand Plaza, it would be insane. But obviously, you have to choose which of the make a ton of crappy creatures payoffs you're going to have, Grand Plaza or They Who Endure.
Absolutely.
And so this deck is very similar to the
Lucian Hecarim deck. Yeah, it is very similar. It's less all in on like these combo plans than the Lucian Hecarim deck is, and just tries to have aggro be its main plan. Like the Lucian Hecarim's deck plan is to kill your life total, right? But like its real plan is to do something really cool and over the top, and usually when it kills you by 40. Or by like a lot, not by just enough. This deck is a get over the finish line deck for sure. It's as aggressive as you can possibly
Atrocity.
be. Yeah, you need to be mulliganing aggressively for aggressive starts. This deck aims to win the game by usually by the first time it attacks. I think, like with
or at
the
least
first
put
attack
you in
token,
the position to win the game the moment you draw it, They Who Endure.
Absolutely, yeah. If you can't do 15 damage in the first like
4
3,
turns.
in your first 3 attacks, you need to be able to do 15 to 20 damage at least. Usually with this deck.
Yeah, I guess you can also win games with back-to-back They Who Endures and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's your plan. So
it can steal the They Who Endure is there
in
to
your
steal
experience,
games.
does this deck play champions? Plays Callista?
I
just
see
Callista.
exactly Callista in almost every variant.
Yeah.
And Callista is quite good, but not really that good in this deck. I think that like Callista like should mostly be getting mulliganed if you're trying to play this deck. Like I really emphasizing the like turn 1 and turn 2 explosive here. Yeah. That's the thing that you need to be doing with this deck, because otherwise you're just playing like a bad variant of discard aggro. You're exchanging some consistency for more powerful explosive turns, so you really need to leverage that.
All right, now I would like to go to B tier. Does that sound good to everyone?
I think
B tier?
that works.
B tier. All right, so B tier, as a quick reminder, B tier are our decks that we think are on a very similar power level in a vacuum to A tier, but just don't line up quite as well right now.
Or are less consistent.
Or are less consistent.
So Feel the Rush, Pirate Aggro, Zoe Fiora, Twisted Fate Ezreal, which is a deck that was popped up, a Wiggly Purple Fish deck, and I think probably the best one. Tom Kent Soraka, Timo Sejuani, Discard Aggro, Ask Sejuani, and a bunch of TF piles that we've been seeing around recently.
Sick. All right, start us off.
I think, because I don't think we need to go in depth on all 17 of these decks, the total, I think we should probably pick a couple of these that we want to say something about.
I think the most important thing to just quickly get over with is there's a lot of like good decks in here that we have talked about being very good in the past, like for example Pirates,
Feel the Rush.
Feel the Rush.
Feel the Rush is a great deck that has very bad matchups right now, like Scouts, Zoe Lee, and
Shen Fiora,
and the like really low to the ground aggro decks are all hard to beat.
I just want to make sure we list off the decks that we are putting in this tier because they're in a poor position, not because we think they're quote unquote bad.
Pirate Aggro,
Feel the Rush, Discard Aggro, right?
Discard Aggro.
Ask Sejuani probably.
Ash Sejuani too,
and Tom Kent Soraka.
And Tom Raka, yes. Those are all decks that are just, we think are not in a great spot.
A lot of these decks had decent Gohard matchups too, and Gohard's fall down has made them drop a tier.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a common story in this tier is good decks that don't quite have a home.
Or were positioned. These decks are all awesome to put in your gauntlet. Like when people, when I queue into a gauntlet that's like Timo Sejuani, or you can't do Timo Sejuani, Ash Sejuani, but like Timo Sejuani or Ash Sejuani, Tom Kent Soraka, and like Feel the Rush or Zoe Fiora, or like, you know, some of the other giant late game decks that we think are in C tier, like Zombie, Anivia, and Deep, I'm like, what the hell am I supposed to do?
Yeah, sometimes you just aren't ready.
Just look, and they're just like they attack on very weird axes. They have polarized matchups, and a lot of times you're like,
and
line up to beat the meta is not going to be good.
You're not comfortable playing with them, I think, is also another like or playing against them. Like you haven't played against those decks in a while, and you're just like, I don't remember how to do this.
So some of these decks are like probably perennially B tier, unless they end up with like really good matchups randomly. And the decks that I'm looking in this tier that are like that are like Timo Sejuani stands out to me.
It's like not quite consistent.
It's just like not consistent enough, just isn't quite powerful enough. Mostly it's the consistency thing.
Speaking of consistency, Zoe Fiora.
Zoe Fiora is another deck that, again, well, actually, this deck is definitely powerful enough to make it to A or even S tier, but the consistency thing really brings it down here. And this is why I think that the Lucian Hecarim... This is my headcanon as to why I thought the Lucian Hecarim deck was probably B tier and not A tier, because it does have that similar consistency problem. But boy, are its explosive turns the most explosive out of that list, so it does make sense why it would be the best of the bunch there.
Yeah.
So what are the other decks that we think are kind of like perennially B tier just because they like aren't good enough?
Random TF piles.
Yeah, random TF piles.
Like, this TF Ezreal deck, like, I'll be honest, I only played it for one game, but like I played against Go Hard and the Wiggly Burblefishes were awful, and like I was up cards a lot because I was playing Twisted Fates and blue cards and cards that drew cards, but not that many of my cards felt like they did anything. My opponent had decently sized creatures.
Thank you. So this is you just perfectly iterated my problem with Wiggly Burblefish. So the problem here is that like we're going to build this cool Spells Matter deck for our payoff, our Lord and Savior Wiggly Burblefish. Okay. And for the Holy Burblefish, we are going to go to such extents as to put Warning Shot just in my deck. Like, no, this is awful.
Wait. I'm not advocating Warning Shot.
Yeah,
That's
no
what's
one's
going in
advocating
that's what's going on in some of these TF piles. Okay.
Well,
these exist. I've seen them. There's three
I've
warning
played
shots in a
I've
TF
played
Draven
warning
list
shot in
in
a
our
TF pile
Discord
before, and it's defensible because I was playing Gangplank.
Okay, I've seen TF Gangplank lists that are playing Warning Shot and like Wiggly Burblefish, or it doesn't even have to
This
be
is
necessarily
sounding good, actually. Keep talking.
Yeah, okay. It doesn't have, or other awful cards, like just pick a card. Like they're just putting pick a card in their deck.
Yes, they are putting yes.
Yeah, that's bad. That card sucks really bad.
The 3-mana put a card on the bottom of your deck, draw 3 fleeting.
Yeah,
it's
the
like
next turn.
TF's champ spell.
TF's champ spell. Yeah, people are just raw dogging that card. They're just putting 2 of that card in their deck.
I had that
That's
card
just
in
good.
my deck playing this Wiggly Burblefish deck, and then my opponent playing TF Go Hard played it, and I was like, what has happened to this game?
Yeah,
What
so-
depths have we stooped to?
And the list of like really bad cards that you need to put in your deck to play these Wiggly Burblefishes effectively isn't that long, and there's like iterative improvement, which is like
Card's really sweet with
a good one and really sweet with Burblefish and high synergy, but it's just like not really that good.
Yeah.
And then there's people who are playing like Warning Shots. There's people who are playing like Parlay. Like there was a deck that I played with a friend that had 3 copies of Warning Shot and 3 copies of Parlay in it, and it's like, no, it's okay. We have Wiggly Burblefish. Like this is
Maybe-
our payoff for these awful cards. Is a
Maybe
3/1
the person
that makes
who I know
another
that you're
awful
talking
card.
about is just not a good deck builder.
But these are decks he found other places.
Oh,
It's
okay, I see,
fine.
I see.
Like we really need to take a step back and be okay with paying 1 mana for a Wiggly Burblefishes, so we don't have to play these just awful cards to make it 0 mana instead.
Yeah.
You know, it's okay if you can't play it until turn 6 and it costs 1 mana on turn 6. That's fine. You know, at least you didn't have to play Warning Shot. You know, you got to play Mystic Shot instead or whatever.
Yeah.
I just want to go on record saying I don't support the Warning Shots, the parlays to play this Burblefish.
If you're playing Ezreal Parlay, is like fine.
Whatever.
No, it's not.
What's it
That's
called?
my point.
What's it called? Yeeby
It's
Warrant.
not.
I've played a lot
That
of
card
a lot of
sucks.
Yeeby Warrants.
Even if you're playing Ezreal, don't put Parlay in your deck.
Okay.
That card
in my
sucks.
mind, in my mind,
This is my take
The
on
payoff
this.
is not Wiggly Burblefish. Wiggly Burblefits assists the payoff that is Mind Meld.
Oh my god, we are playing different Wiggly Burblefish decks.
That's the Wiggly Burblefish deck that I've lost to.
Oh, interesting.
That's what's been killing me.
There's quite a bit. There's some Mind Meld piles going around.
It's not just Wiggly Burblefish. It's Wiggly Burblefish making things that make their Mind Meld bigger, so their Wiggly Burblefish is an 11/11.
Wait. Oh, yeah, because Mind Meld is the spells. Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's decks
What region is
basically
that card?
are doing.
I don't remember.
I think it's...
I think is it Bilgewater?
I'm not.
No,
gonna
I think it's
pretend.
Piltover's on.
There are people who are just like playing 3 Twisted Fate, 3 Wiggly Burblefish, and just like
And just-
any
and we
other
ride.
amount of cards to possibly make it work. I mean, it really looks like Expedition decks.
Yeah.
These like,
Yeah, it does.
please stop making Wiggly Burblefish your payoff. This is a
Play
3/1.
salvage instead of pick a card.
It's
Trust
a
me.
3. Yeah, it's a 3/1 that draws you a bad spell.
Yeah.
And it's free, so cool, but like this is not going to win you the game, right? Like you can put it in your deck as a good mid-range card, and it is that. But it is not this build around end all be all that
And
I
if
seem
it's
to
winning
think
you-
people are thinking.
If it's winning you the game, you probably could have won it harder with a better card.
Yeah.
maybe, yeah, like if you just happen to hit your opponent 4 times with this elusive wiggly burblefish, guess what? You probably could have spent 4 mana on the Zap Spray Fin, and it would have done the same thing.
All right.
you know.
Are we ready to move on to C tier decks? Are we done talking
Yeah,
about Wiggly
okay.
Burblefish?
That's my rant on the holy burblefish. Get that one out.
Okay, so C tier, we have Mist Wraiths. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. Old S tier deck.
Yeah.
I do think that this deck is probably better than C tier, but C tier is based on how much I've seen it played recently and how it's felt, which is not good. Zombie Anivia decks, deep decks, anything that's playing the card Vladimir or the card Scargrounds. Hate to break it to you.
Yeah, anything with the card Karma in it,
Yeah.
solidly in the C tier, I think.
Yeah. Nightfall and Overwhelm decks, which is the decks that are spread across almost always Noxus and then Targon or Freljord, and are any combination of Draven, Tryndamere, Darius.
There's like some Taric.
Tarek. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
Sejuani. Yeah, there's lots of these, but they're just like units that want to pump large Overwhelm units that were good against Go Hard and I don't think are great now.
I do want to say that I think there is definitely one of these iterations of one of these Overwhelm decks that should be in B tier, maybe even A, but I don't even know what it is.
Yeah, we don't even know where to start to find
I
it.
think
You
there's
have to
so
play
many
games
iterations
with so many
of that
versions.
game plan.
I think that our C tier it consists of decks that at one point were either A or B tier because they at that point had a particularly good meta angle for whatever reason, and now they
Stargrounds, which has never been good.
yeah, and now they still kind of exist, right? So
Yeah.
like this is where I think like most of these Overwhelm decks exist, or like mostly I want to focus on the Overwhelm decks for the point of this argument. The Overwhelm decks in general are a deck that I think have never really been that good. It's always been fragile from a gameplay perspective. There's always been a lot of answers to it.
They also just feel but they also feel hard to beat sometimes.
And a lot of the time they just feel hard to beat. And that comes with, I think that they are like, it's like a B tier deck that can be playable in the right meta, where the meta does not revolve around cards that happen to deal with your plan as well.
Yeah.
If you can find a meta where people aren't playing Frostbite and like they aren't playing Vengeance, for example, whatever that meta may be, then you can probably start whipping out your Overwhelm decks and trying to put 4 mites or 3 mites on a thing and just kill someone, right? With your, 15 power overwhelming Darius.
or more likely freaking decisive maneuvering a board full of overwhelming
decisive
creatures.
maneuvering a bunch of stuff away. Right. There are plenty of things that you can be doing that are powerful with this deck. They just don't really line up that well now.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't play them, basically. You know, like these C tier decks are not awful. Just blanket statement. They're not, like, at least these C tier decks are good.
They will
for the
take
most part.
games.
Yeah.
These decks will take games.
These are decks that you've probably heard of and that you will lose to sometimes. This isn't your friend's random really jank deck. There's an even lower tier for that. Like, these decks
We're
are
not going to
acceptable.
talk about those decks.
Yeah.
So if you think about playing them, maybe reach out in the Discord and we'll help you.
Maybe.
If you feel inclined to submit a deck that has Targon's Peak in it, just it's okay to ask for help.
There should be a Targon's Peak helpline.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
like-
And I'm telling you,
There should be
it's
a
our
24
Discord.
hour.
Just be like, hey guys, I'm thinking about playing this card. Talk to me, and we'll be there.
Please,
for you.
we have professional help available 24 hours a day for anyone attempting to put Targon's Peak in their deck. No,
I honestly forgot that card existed.
it's really bad. So these C tier decks, I think, are to wrap it around. They're playable. You can play them. I especially think if you want to play them, the place will be specific gauntlets where you can find a specific lineup that attacks a meta really well or something, or you can ban out decks that do have that innate counters to your deck's plan in them. And if you are going to do so, just do it smartly. Don't just play these decks because they're your favorite deck, and especially not if they were your favorite deck from last season or whatever. These feel kind of outdated.
Once again, this is if you want to be good. Like, you can go.
Yeah.
Like, this is
Yeah.
be good is not what I meant to say. I meant like if you want to seriously try to climb. If you would like to hang out and just play this deck because you like it, they're reasonable. Like,
Yeah.
these decks are all reasonable.
Before we like we're gonna move on to whatever next, the user questions or whatever, I was gonna like jump in and say like, by the way, guys, if we're like ripping your favorite deck to pieces right now, do not feel bad. We're not here to make you feel bad. Like, it's okay. Like, this is a game. Have fun. If you want to just have fun, we're just telling you what the best angle is to climb to Masters. That's our goal right now.
If you just like want to play the best Riffin deck or Victor deck, and
or Wiggly
Burblefish
deck, for example,
by all means,
live your best life. But if you expect to climb to Masters, that's not the official recommendation of the Champ Select podcast.
Yeah.
So
all right. So that's our meta tier list. Before we move on to viewer questions, I would like to spend a quick amount of time recapping, discussing very briefly what we each think about the meta in general. Have we been liking it? Do we think there's some things that need to change, essentially? So let's just go around the table and talk real quickly about what we think about the meta. I'll start us off here. So in general, I'm actually really happy with it. It feels plenty diverse. There's lots of good deck choices. There are lots of good reasons to make those deck choices based on what you expect to play against. And there's lots of play even in the favored and like bad matchups, essentially, right? It doesn't feel like rock paper scissors. In a matchup that's technically bad, there's plenty of play to be had on both sides. Usually it just feels slightly disadvantaged or slightly advantaged with it, which I think is a really healthy sign of a good meta.
This is not quite like when Feel the Rush and 4-mana Lee Sin Zed decks were the best deck, and you should not play them.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that I have played pretty much every deck in that A tier on the ladder, actively trying to climb, and the S tier, and think that they are good for specific reasons at various times. I think the decks are fun to play. I'm really happy with this meta in general. I've had a lot of fun playing all of these decks.
I'm just gonna say Zoe Lee and probably the Grand Plaza are just too good. I think that Lee Zoe just has too few bad matchups, wins the bad matchups that it does have too often, and wins the good matchups, too often as well. I think that this deck is just too good and is going to need to get banned based on the amount of people I see it playing it generally on the ladder, the amount of win rates, the win rate people have said that they have, and the amount of people that have like 500 plus, 400 plus points in Masters, like that half of them are on this deck right now is problematic. I think that this deck is going to need to change. And you know what? If you're feeling stale because you hate playing against this deck and don't like playing this deck right now, you might want to take a break for a week. It is going to be around. It is the best deck, and hopefully it will get changed.
Cool. Yeah, and pretty much, I also agree with Alex. I like the meta. I think it's a good spot. I hate the card Grand Plaza. I'll always hate the card Grand Plaza forever. I don't think I'll ever like that card. That being said, I'm currently playing it in Scouts.
LP sellout confirmed.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Always.
We are spikes after.
We're all LP sellouts.
Yeah. Anyway, that being said, I don't think it's a huge problem if it even is one. It might need a nerf. It might not need a nerf. And I don't actually know if it needs a nerf or not. If it gets one, that's fine. If it doesn't, that's honestly also fine with me.
Yeah, so it sounds like our general group consensus is if you're trying to rank up, you should probably be playing Lee Zoe or Scouts.
And you do have to accept that, especially your first times playing Lee Zoe, playing against something like Scouts, you're going to get run over sometimes, and it's going to feel bad. But it is, in general, I think, going to be very positive against the...
All right.
Yeah.
Let's move on to our listener questions for the week. We got a few here in their Discord. We got a lot, actually, so I'm pretty excited to talk about most of these. All right. Let's start with a viewer question from Cloud Asia. They say, in one of your old episodes, I remember that you guys said that not every card in a card game should be competitive and that it's important to have bad cards. Could you guys elaborate on that? Go ahead, Hugh.
I think... how to put this? It's just really, I think the most important thing to remember here is it's kind of impossible to make every single card in a card game completely playable always. There have to be cards that are a little more niche. There have to be cards that calling them bad cards isn't always the best thing to call them. There are some cards, for example, illegal contraption. The 6 mana make a 5/5.
Yeah.
Like that card's just like aggressively subpar, and that's okay. It's an old card. But there are other cards that are like pretty niche, like the card in Targa on the 3-drop, draw a landmark or destroy a landmark.
Oh, Path of Discovery.
Path of Discovery. That's a card that's sometimes
Divergent paths. It's divergent
paths. Yes,
Path of Discovery is the landmark half. Yeah. It's divergent paths. Correct.
Well, card games. This particular card game will mix you up on names because like you'll play Twin Disciplines, and then you'll think the card is called Discipline of Force because that's the one that you're like putting on the stack.
Right. Yeah.
Weird. Yeah, it's weird like that.
But especially in a card game that has a limited format, which in this game, Expedition, like a draft, something where you're making a deck and then just sort of playing with it. It's got to have more than just all these cards that are in all these best decks that are good almost always. Like you can't just make a card game full of just good cards, then sort of nothing's good is part of the problem there.
Yeah, it really is the if everything's good, nothing's good problem. Yeah. So like in order to have cards that feel good, right? In order to have the feeling, and this comes from like a core game development, game design principle. In order to have a card that feels good in your game, there has to be a correlation to something, right? Like if a card feels above rate, it'll feel good. And if there is no quote unquote rate, because every card is on an equal power level, right? Like then every card is just going to feel fine.
A little different.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. They're going to feel
if every
different.
single creature was a 1 mana 2/2, a 2 mana 4/4, a 3 mana 6/6. Like none of those, like those are all way above rate and really good, but then all of a sudden, like
none of them
are that great because they're
maybe
just
the 3
that.
mana 6/6 is the only good one. Maybe the 2 mana 4/4 is the only good one.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So I think that there are two things going on here. I think that one is that what you're talking about, that not all cards can be good, and you want cards that are niche. Like I just made a joke about Targon's Peak, but that card's really cool, and like some people are going to put it in decks.
It's fun. Yeah,
it's going to be neat to play with.
Yeah.
And the second one is there's a lot of different ways to play this game. We do not talk about Expedition very much on this podcast, even though we all love it. We don't talk about
Labs ever.
We don't talk about there's one more game type. What's it?
Is there?
I can only think of Labs and Expedition.
Yeah, Labs. So like there's weird formats with weird deck building restrictions. There's Singleton. There's that we're playing in Gauntlets reasonably often. So different cards are going to be good in different situations. Like Pursuit of Perfection is not a good
constructed card,
even though I did lose to it recently.
But it is a pretty good limited card.
But it's a good limited card, and it's a really
great
good Singleton
card.
And so like cards like that need to exist and feel different. And also, it's just impossible to design a set of interesting cards in which all are playable.
Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely.
Like
true.
you just can never do that. And bad cards need to exist for draft, or for Expedition. Bad cards need to exist for comparison, and also they just inevitably will exist. Like it's good that the worst card in this game is like an uncomplicated 2 mana 2/3 trample, like Startled Stomper or whatever, right? I don't think that's the literal worst card in the game, but it's good that that's the worst card instead of the worst card being like a 3 mana 3/3 that enters the battlefield. That like when you play it gains you life, and sometimes like when it's damaged deals damage. Like it's good that it is not that complex.
Yeah,
because
you can just have Golden Crush bot in your game, and you just don't want to play it.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
but you can also play it, and it does okay.
And also think about that card. That card is reasonable in Expedition. If it was a 2/4, it would be horrendous in Expedition. If it was a 3/5, I think it would be constructed playable. Yeah. Like the margins are very small. I think that especially cards that are just stats. For example, Loyal Badger Bear. Loyal Badger Bear used to be a 4/4 for 3. So nerfing it was part of nerfing Grizzled Ranger, but also people were putting 4 Grizzled Rangers and 4 Badger Bears in there, or 3 Grizzled Rangers and 3 Badger Bears in their deck. I messed myself up because I said 4/4 out loud. And now nobody is putting Loyal Badger Bear in their deck at 3/4. So like the margins are so small. That card is one difference in power is either too good or not good enough.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And so, that just kind of has to happen. We all design games as a hobby as well.
We also have
designed a game that is published, or developed a game that is published, and are currently developing other games that we hope to publish. And that's something that we run into. From that is, not all cards can feel great. Some cards just need to be rate, like Mystic Shot, but Mystic Shot's a bad example because it's good. But
yeah, exactly. All right.
Yeah.
So Moving on, our next one comes from Twilight in the Discord, and they ask, are there any cards that, despite past nerfs, you still find oppressive? So, oppressive is an interesting word choice there, because I think that oppressive, my answer will be no. I don't find any cards in the game currently oppressive. I don't think there's anything that is just really stunting the ability for other things to exist. The closest card that I can think of is Hush. I think that despite a previous nerf, Hush is a little too good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Looking at that tier list that we put together, there's a pretty even spread of regions. Ionia isn't super represented as like a cornerstone, but it's a huge part of Zoe Lee, and it's a big part of Fiora Shen.
Do you think Deny is too good? Like,
no, I don't think Deny is too good. I think that it can sometimes feel annoying because sometimes your 9 minute slow spell is insane unless you're playing against Ionia, and then Deny feels kind of oppressive because your deck built around your 9 minute slow spell is good against everything but a region, everything but a card.
That's true.
And that is, can be frustrating.
I guess Hush has a very similar play pattern with
so
that.
does Grand Plaza. There are cards that feel oppressive but aren't actually oppressive. They just like can really screw you over sometimes.
Yeah, there are some decks that really have a hard problem or a hard time with a couple of cards, and those cards are like Deny and Hush. And I guess the Grand Plaza.
I do feel like the Grand Plaza is there's no despite previous nerfs here because it hasn't been nerfed yet, and I do think it will be. But it feels hard to play against because they're just going to keep eating your creatures, and then they like play a creature and you can't play a creature because your creature would die, but then you have to take a bunch of damage.
Yeah, I think the closest to the word oppressive here is Grand Plaza for sure.
But that doesn't satisfy the question.
So there's the solid half answer. I think that the most oppressive card in the game is the Grand Plaza, and the best card in the game that has been nerfed previously is Hush. That's my take.
I think that generally, though, I actually think the nerf to Hush was kind of a side grade. Like it got nerfed
I think it was a side
going
grade.
infinite in a weird way.
Well, I think Hush was pretty objectively better before it became a 2-mana single spell.
That's reasonable, but also Lee Sin is one that has actually gotten for sure nerfed and is still very good.
Oh yeah, that's true.
That's true. I did not think about Lee Sin at all, but I like Lee Sin.
Draven?
So.
Draven got nerfed.
Wait, what?
I saw a picture of Draven as a 4/3 recently, and I realized that is what that card did like in the very beginning. It was just exactly the same, but an extra point of power, so that was mostly a joke. But
Okay. Because I didn't even know that. I started playing
beta.
I did too, yeah, but I was like mid beta. You guys started like day 2 of this game's existence.
Yeah, the day that it was available for download, I downloaded it, but I didn't play it. I didn't play it until like a couple weeks later.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And Jonathan is my past roommate. Jonathan is actually the one who told me to play it, and then I started playing, and this was when like elusives were great, and then elusives got nerfed, and then
many times.
Yeah, and then
there was Rasa the Sunderer, Hecarim going around.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, next question. That's enough living in the past for now. This comes from Dragon in our Discord. They ask, when you guys are playing Legends of Runeterra, are you doing anything else in the background, or are you focused in on the
Noble? I'll let you take this one first.
I have a bad habit of playing this game on my phone, mostly manifested by the fact that both of my computers suck. I have a desktop and a laptop that are both incredibly slow. I am working on fixing the problem. I did procrastinate on getting a new desktop computer, which led to them all the parts being out of stock or massively overpriced because of Christmas and stimulus checks. So I'm not rectifying that soon, but I do mostly play on my phone, and that leads to a lot of me watching television or being on the couch with my roommates or
not realizing it's your move in poker.
Yes, all of the above.
You guys could not see the look of horror you just gave Noble when he said that. It was
true.
So sassy.
All true. I found that I do that, and I can climb much slowly, but I definitely lose games that I shouldn't have lost. It has been a month or two since I've actually played a game that I started and then forgot I was playing, doing cooking or whatever, and then looked over and be like, oh, I guess I just lost LP because I started a game and then literally never took an action. But I find that I'm much more effective not doing other things, but I often do other things. I'm really a multitasker, just in general.
I personally frequently do not do other things because usually for me, I work almost 50 hours a week every week, and so the time I have to devote to any game in general is very little. So when I do devote time to this game, which I try to do as often as possible, I take it very seriously, almost always. Occasionally, usually when I'm doing something else while I'm playing this game, it's because I'm like mega tilted. And I'm just like,
need a distraction.
And I just like need a distraction to, which is worse because like
now you're distracted.
Now
and
I'm distracted
tilted.
and tilted, and then I play even worse than I was before, and I just lose more, and then I'm just like, we're off this game now. I'll just not play it for 2 days, like, you know. So basically, if I'm taking the game seriously, which is most of the time, I will not be doing something else.
I have a very one-track mind. So I am nearly incapable of playing this game and doing something else at the same time. So I have a very hard time holding a conversation while I'm playing the game. I very frequently have to be like, okay, give me a sec, I need to do this, and then I'll like talk to you like for like the 30 seconds while my opponent is taking their turn or whatever. Usually if I'm like playing a game and talking to someone, even on like Discord or whatever, that exact interaction that I just said happens a lot, where I'm like, hold on, just like give me a sec and then say your thing, because I have a real hard time multitasking just in general. I'm just very bad at it as a human. So pretty much my always go-to whenever I'm playing this game is like I'll pretty much always turn on like some music or something, and then I'll just like turn on the game and play. So I pretty much never have anything else going on while I'm playing. But that's not because I don't want to. It's because I'm like physically unable.
Yeah. And normally we go tackle these questions like in the order they were posted, but I do think that this particular question segues perfectly into the question we have about the pros and cons of playing on mobile versus sitting on a computer.
Yeah, so this comes from Martin_CY in our Discord. They ask, talk a bit about what you think the pro cons of playing on mobile versus sitting on computer. Can you be competitive, while playing on a mobile device, or is that setting out to be a scrub?
I have played 95% of my Legends of Runeterra games on mobile since mobile came out. I would hope that I am not a scrub, so I would say that. I will note that whenever I play any match that I consider to be high stakes, whether it was the Last Chance Gauntlet or my actual like tournament or my final grind to making top 700, I played all of those matches on a computer because I wanted to minimize the chance that I like fat fingered on my tiny screen the wrong card, and also because I could be discording for the Last Chance Gauntlet and the ladder climb. So I do turn to my computer and when it's high stakes, but I think you can absolutely grind your ladder on your phone.
Yeah, I don't see any reason why you can't be some serious competitive player playing on your phone.
Especially because you just need to play a lot of matches, so you can't always be at your computer.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I started, now that I have the Wi-Fi password for my work, I've started playing Runeterra during break.
Yeah, you can play Runeterra on your phone during break. You can play playing anywhere is totally fine as long as you put effort into playing the game, right? Like you need to be able to, and I think this goes back into like the distraction thing. Like I think you will clearly play worse if you're distracted while playing, obviously. I think that it does not matter the hardware that you're playing the game on. If you're playing in a serious way, it doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter the hardware you're using. You should have similar results.
Yes, I do think though if it is possible for you to play on a computer, and as equally as possible as for you to play on your phone, a computer is always, there are some minor downsides that a phone has, like Noah mentioned, fat fingering things.
Your hand can just be hard to see, and you have like take
exactly.
a bunch of time like scrolling
I've
through.
had issues with that personally. It takes a
when
little
your hands
longer.
Get full. Like if you're playing a deck where like Lee Zoe, where your hand is like full of like random created cards, and you're like, I've played the wrong. I've like, especially with burst spells, I've accidentally dragged a Hush onto the stack. Well, not Hush because it targets, but I've accidentally got dragged
like super cool
star chart when I meant to drag something else, and I was like, I did not want to play
and random
that.
things like that are things that like there is no reason to play on your phone if you can play on a computer from that perspective. So like if you can play on a computer, play on a computer, but you absolutely can be competitive from your phone is where I'm landing on this.
Absolutely. All right. Our next question comes from Tede in the Discord. They ask, you guys talked about decks from metas past on the last episode. If you could bring one deck back to being fully viable, i.e. unnerfed cards, to the current meta, Which will it be and why?
Noble, you look excited.
Yes, I have 7 decks.
You have 7?
Not actually.
Okay.
So
Oh my
when I first
God.
started playing this deck, my favorite deck was Elusives. I do think that Elusives deck with like Omen Hawk and unnerfed Inspiring Mentor and unnerfed Navori Conspirator and very powerful Kenku Wayfinder turns and all of that jazz. While that deck was super fun to play, I don't think that is the deck that I think that deck was pretty unhealthy. Although it was super sick because it was basically you can't. It's very hard to block elusive creatures. So the whole game resolved around like your opponent not being able to block your units and you figuring out a way to kill them before they killed you, and it happened way more often than not. My actual answer to this question is unnerfing Karma.
Hell yeah.
Karma was
Couldn't
very,
agree
very good
anymore.
for a while. There was a whole period where the entire meta was Ionia was just insane for a while. So after they nerfed those elusive cards that I was just talking about, Shadow Assassin was still a 2/2 and Solitary Monk was still a 4/3. And so many decks banked up to 6 spell mana and then played one of Shadow Assassin or Solitary Monk as their 3-drops. That was their only 3-drop units. And then they played a ton of spells. And then Karma, Ezreal, Heimerdinger, kind of, some combination thereof.
Things that do things with spells.
Yeah, and so Ionia, Piltover, and Zaun's decks were very dominant for a while there. And I agree that it was kind of an unhealthy play pattern, especially because you were often standaloning Solitary Monks and trying to kill your opponents in like 3 turns, because that makes it 7 power, and then that plus a rally lets you kill them very
Them
quickly.
dead. Yeah.
Yeah. I just really miss playing Ionia, Piltover, and Zaun spell-based control decks. They felt very much like control. They felt not quite as grindy because they turned the corner when Karma hit 10 very hard. But it was very cool to try to set up your Heimerdinger Karma turns on turn 5 with 3 spell mana, playing Flash of Brilliance to refill your mana and make a bunch of Heimerdinger turrets. The deck was just super fun. It played a ton of removal, ton of interaction, and then had a really cool ebb and flow to the gameplay where you're like trying to put your cards down on turns when they protect them. Also, Deny was 3 mana. There were a lot of good things going on with that deck, and it was definitely too good, but it was just such a blast.
Yeah, it was really sweet. I have a very similar answer to that one.
Especially Karma making a random card in your hand leads to a lot of variety in gameplay, which is neat.
Yeah. My ideal bring back deck is basically that, like Karma Heimerdinger or like Ezreal Heimerdinger variants of decks. Those were just the early iteration of the control decks in this game were really sweet, and I really liked Heimerdinger, and being able to play elusive Burblefish-sized bodies whenever you cast Flash of Brilliance and you'd get your mana back was really cool.
That card is so much better than Burblefish.
Yeah,
0 mana 3/1 that makes a 6-cost spell in your hand.
Yeah, and it used to be just a random spell in general.
Yeah, it used to be a random spell. So you like Flash of Brilliance and made another Flash of Brilliance.
Yeah, sometimes you could do stupid stuff like that.
And sometimes it was making Mystic
Yeah,
Shot.
and sometimes Karma was making you random spells. So that deck was really sweet, and it felt different to play every time because of all the different things that gave you random spells, and it was cool to piece it all together into these control packages. Or do I cast it now for mana efficiency next turn so that I got a Heimerdinger turret, etc. So that's my answer as well. How about you, Hugh?
Honestly, if I had to like really pick one, it would also be make Karma like as good as she was.
We're in agreement here. We like Karma on this podcast.
But I will say, for the sake of just a little variety here, I do miss TF Swain.
Oh, that deck was sweet. Yeah.
Yeah, I do miss having TF Swain. That was when Make It Rain was 2 mana, which was kind of too good.
It was before Go Hard.
Talk about a card that's oppressive is Make It Rain at 1 mana, invalidating small creatures so hard.
Yeah, exactly.
That was big.
But yeah.
All
right.
I think we want to end with some last group of questions that kind of tie in.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Go ahead.
Martin CY in our Discord, who we've already talked about their first question, which was the mobile games. But then they came up with some other stuff about how many games, I'm just going to read these all. How many games does it take to know if a deck works or not? How much do you tweak a deck while playing it, adding and removing cards? And do you tweak a deck intraday depending on how the meta is looking? And how much do you think the meta is driven by what the, for example, top 5 streamers played in the last 24 hours? Because this game is so cheap, you can just like I hit import deck and almost always have all but 1 or 2 cards.
Yeah,
and so you can play basically any deck at any time.
I think there's a lot to unpack here. So I want to start with the tweaking decks package in general. So I'm going to start with about how long does it take me to feel like I know whether or not a deck's good?
Yeah.
Usually, for me, I have an idea of whether or not I think the deck is good before I hit play. Usually, I look at the thing, and I'm like, is this deck good? It's got 3 copies of Steel Tempest in it. Like, is this deck actually good? Yeah, is this deck actually good? And usually, that's my like initial gut reaction to the deck is the first thing in the back of my head. That being said, I'm gonna put out like a blanket number of it takes me about 3 games to decide whether or not I like a deck enough to keep playing it. So about 3 games in is what I will give at minimum every deck. I'll give every deck about 3 games, and then if my suspicions were affirmed, I'm usually just done with it. If I don't have a good time in those 3 games, I didn't like the deck to begin with, I'm usually just off it.
I will admit, this is hard when you're trying to test games on ranks, because if you play 3 games and you lose all of them, you get set back like more than half a tier.
Yeah,
which is a lot.
So that's my first check is about 3 games in. Is like, is this deck good at about 3 checks? If I think that the deck is good or has potential, I will keep playing. If I thought the deck was good to begin with and then had bad games with it the first 3, I'll usually keep playing it to see if my gut was wrong. If I thought the deck was bad and I have good games, I'm definitely going to keep playing it to see if my gut was wrong, right? And it is at about the 3rd game mark where I start to make tweaks to the list. So whenever I'm given a list, I never change a card before I play a game, at least a game or a few games with a deck, because you don't really know the packages that you're altering if you haven't played a deck. You can visualize it in your head, but you might just miss an interaction because you haven't played the deck or whatever. It's very common. So I'll always play the exact list. About 3 games in, I'll make any tweaks that I feel like I wanted. You know, maybe there's an obvious card that stands out to me as bad, and then I play 3 games.
Not playing Mystic Shot or whatever.
Yeah, and then I played 3 games, and it's like, yeah, that card was bad or whatever. You know, there's a lot of random spicy one-ofs that people put in their brews that, you know, if a hive mind looks at it, they could come up with a better list or whatever. I'm not claiming to be a hive mind, but I'm attempting to make those changes myself, essentially. So about 3 games in, I'll make my first tweaks, decide if I keep wanting to play the deck. If I do, I'll keep playing the deck. Usually around like another 3 or 4 games, I'll go back, make any other changes if I feel like I need them. And by that point, I've usually played like 8 to 10-ish games is about where I can decide whether or not I actually think a deck is like generic good or just like generic bad. Is about 10 games for me is where I can put the marker at. This deck's good, it's feeling good, the games are close, like I'm interacting in positive ways in these games. Like I keep coming out ahead doing certain turn actions, right? Like these are the generic patterns that you tend to notice when you play like about 10 games with a deck of like, yeah, I keep winning these neutral interactions, this deck's pretty good. Right. How about you guys?
I mostly the 3 games thing as far as initial things go is like pretty spot on for me too. I will say that's also another thing I try and look out for while I'm playing is just when I lose, did I lose because I was playing the deck poorly, or did I lose because my opponent got a good draw, or did I lose because my opponent was playing better than me? Like if I'm losing for the right reasons, totally stay on the deck.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I'm losing for reasons like I did nothing for 3 turns, my
opening hand was really clunky,
or they did nothing for 3 turns and I couldn't do anything about it. Like there's reasons why I lost that would put me off a deck, and there's reasons why I lost that would actually encourage me to keep playing.
Absolutely, very true.
Like
yeah.
if
the manner of the games you're playing matters so much.
Yeah, if I can tell I'm playing the deck poorly, like really tell, and I can tell that there's a lot of skill that needs to be put into the deck to really make it shine,
you're more likely to keep playing it.
So much more likely to keep playing, because it could be like, in general, I really enjoy playing decks that reward experience on a deck.
Absolutely.
So what you both said is funny, because just yesterday I took this TF Ezreal deck off of someone who's top 10 NA Masters. I put it in my deck, I crafted the cards, and I hit play. Then 3 turns in, I drew a card, and I was like, I did not know this card was in this deck.
Which
I had
one
a Twisted Fate in play, and I was like, pick a card?
Yeah,
it doesn't
say
TF,
exactly.
Pick a card.
Why do people put this card in their Holy Burblefish deck? Oh
yeah.
my lord.
Yeah. So then I played it.
Man. It gets into people's heads.
Yeah. So
They just start thinking everything's okay when you put burblefish into. It's like unparalleled human power. Like if you just put a burblefish into someone's hands, they start to think anything is possible.
Yeah.
It's not like oh yes, now I can finally play parlay.
And then I played one game with the deck, lost, and then I'm off it. So like,
see now those are the decks where I look at it and I'm like, are you sure? Like, are you sure I should play this deck?
That is not empirical.
It's playing 3 copies of Pesky Spectre.
That is not me doing my due diligence. That is me being afraid of losing because I'm not in Masters yet, and wanting to make sure that I'm continuing to climb with Lee Zoe because every time I play that deck, I get good results. So it was just like, I tried out like 3 different decks for a total of like 6 games yesterday, and I was like, okay, off that, I went like 2 and 4. I need to get back to winning, and then I like started playing Zoe Lee, which might not be the best, but is where I'm at right now in my climb.
Yeah. So as for tweaking decks, because I think that this in general goes into more about like meta decks and like how much do you change your stock list in any given day. For me, I tend to make few changes because I'm not that good at it. I'm
Same.
I'm in general not that good at looking at a deck list and thinking to myself like, I need X card to exploit the meta or to make this matchup better. It's one of the things that I've been genuinely not that good at in card games, pretty much in my entire experience with card games. And we have friends that are really good at that type of
tweaking.
thing. Yeah, like tweaking decks.
Or deck building in general.
Deck building in general. There are a few people I know who I think are very skilled at it and make excellent changes consistently. And I really listen to those people's advice. And I think that those people, I've seen them do it after like 1 or 2 games, which I think is just like mind blowing, where they're just like, I've played 1 or 2 games with the deck. I already know that we're going to need more consistency in a little bit. I'm going to add an extra creature or whatever, right? There's people who are really good at that. I'm not one of those people. So if I make a change, it usually is because I feel like I'm really teching to beat something. So like, for example, I played a bit of Shen Fiora somewhat recently because there was a huge rise in scouts, mostly as a response to the rise in Lee Zoe. But regardless of how we got there, I played some Shen Fiora, and I really wanted to make my deck good against aggro. Like, it was just so much aggro, and I was like, this is already a good deck against aggro. I want to make sure I cannot lose. So I put extra copies of Spirit's Refuge in my deck instead of Riposte. And those are like small changes, right? Like 1 or 2 card changes, and there's also like various packages that sometimes you can take a package out of a deck. Basically, if you're very familiar with a deck, I think that you can take a package out of it if you know what you're doing. But if you aren't so familiar with a deck, try to change the like 1-ofs or 2-ofs, because those cards are almost always less important.
Try and identify the flex slots.
Yeah, there's flex slots in every deck, so you just need to identify
play enough
what they
to
are.
identify them. Yeah. I also play decks a lot. So I've played a lot of Fiora Shen, I would say. I've played a lot of Lee Zoe.
Yeah.
I've played a lot of Feel the Rush, and I've played a lot of TF Go Hard. And then when I'm importing someone's deck list, even if I haven't played with that specific deck list in this meta, I can be like, oh yeah, well, I never liked this card and I did like that card, and then I can start changing some flex slots.
Absolutely.
For example, I would take people's TF Go Hard list last season and then slot in Withering Whales and a Petty Officer. 2 Withering Whales and a Petty Officer if they weren't playing them. Over some other random cards that I thought were bad, and
take out Chronicler of Ruin, put in Commander Ledros.
Every time.
As you do.
Every single
as you
time.
do. Yeah, so there are some cards that you just get a feel for. There's some cards that you just immediately know that you don't like in certain archetypes. The more you play an archetype, the more flexible you should be with the changing. But I like I said earlier, if I've never played a deck before, I'm not going to change the list. And it really comes to that. Like, I feel more comfortable making changes to decks that I have have played more. And I think that comes down to I'm not that good at it, so I need a lot of familiarity with my deck so that I can really understand the changes I'm making and why I'm making them. So I'm a little bit reserved to make changes myself.
Yeah, I'm a more extreme example of that. Every time I try and tweak a list, it goes horrendously. I think I am god-awful at deck building in this game. I think I'm actually god-awful at deck building in every single card game I've ever played, with the exception of the one we helped develop.
Evian, yeah. Hugh, it's funny because I met Hugh designing Evian, and Hugh was just like the guy who like broke deck ideas or like tuned deck ideas. We're like, we think this might be good. What's Hugh comes up with it? And then it would go into Hugh's brain, and then like something would come out that was absolutely unbeatable
shake him.
and needed to be changed. Yeah, and so I was like, Hugh's a master deck builder, and it's really funny for me to hear you say like that you just are not good at anything but that game.
Yeah, I totally crushed it at deck building in that game, and every other game, man, I just can't do it. Like I tried to mess with the Zoe Lee list, and I was like, I started to like get a little disillusioned by it because like I'm losing all these games. And I just like, wait a second, I made some changes. Let me change it back. 7 wins in a row.
What were your changes, Hugh?
I don't remember.
Just block them out. It never happened. Block them out. All right. So our last question for this episode.
Wait, one change that I really want to say that I just feel very justified about is in our first version of Lee Zoe, we were not playing Deep Meditation. And I've recently started playing the version with Deep Meditation, and I have never liked drawing that card and really want to change it back.
All right.
And that was just like an example of like gut check. We didn't need Deep Meditation, and I think deck might run better without it, but maybe I'm crazy.
I also just remember the biggest thing I changed. It was putting in, it was getting real greedy and putting in 3 Sunblessed figures.
Oh, dear Lord.
That's too many.
Why? See, I figured it out. You've told me one thing. Why do you always put 3 of random bad card in?
Because
Sunblessed figure isn't bad.
It might be good. Then 3 of those, right?
Yeah, this is the problem. See, when you're changing
really
flex slots, you don't just slam dunk 3 of a flex card.
But it's really hard to test if you only put 1 in.
Exactly.
Because
He nailed it.
Don't see it very often.
If you don't see the card, you don't know how good it is. So you need to see the card.
That's true, but usually you can think to yourself, like, man, Sunblessed figure would have been good here. Like when something bad happens or whatever.
And I try and do that, but then I just like get really excited.
Then you end up with 2. Whatever. I don't recommend doing what Hugh did for viewers at home.
We're running pretty long. Do we want to table the last question until next episode, or do we want to talk about it?
We got one more. We can power it out.
Let's just do it. I mean, I don't think.
This is our longest episode so far already.
From Cloud Aisha. They say, what characteristics do you predict the Shurima region will have?
I read this earlier today, and I really tried to come up with an answer before we got here.
Just like stumped, or
I'm not super. Yeah, a little stumped. I do have like a vague idea of what I think Azir will do, because I swear to God, if Azir is not in this Shurima set,
he's gonna make Sand Soldiers.
Lose my mind. But like I think he's gonna like enter, make a Sand Soldier. It's gonna be like a 2/1 ephemeral with like Challenger or something. And then
whatever.
like when he levels up, he's gonna instead make it's gonna be like a kind of similar to Quinn, actually. In my mind, he's a lot like Quinn.
All right, so I think that the general mechanics, I think there's clearly going to be a new mechanic that
there has to be a new keyword. There's been a new keyword every region.
I expect that things are going to have barrier. I don't know, for whatever reason. That sounds kind of Shurima to me. Like, of the mechanics that exist right now, barrier kind of stands out to me.
What's in the desert like survivalist, kind of like they're kind of just.
Or like protected by the sun or whatever. I don't know. That one stands out to me
we already have
for no real good reason.
Like, I don't know.
Who knows? It's hard to tell because it feels like there are like general card game mechanics that, like, you know, Targon's kind of like the ramp color and like, or the ramp region, and then there's like Shadow Isles.
Freljord's the ramp region for sure.
And Freljord, right? Yeah. And then there's like, you know, Shadow Isles and Ionia, which feel kind of like the control regions or whatever. So like, do we think it'll be an aggro region? Do you think it'll be a
mid-range, very mid-range?
So I think it'll be aggressively mid-range. I think there's going to be some, like, when I think of Shurima, the 2 of the big things I think of is Nasus and Renekton, and how their ults make them bigger all of a sudden. And I'm thinking of like sort of like a weird like upgrade type mechanic.
Rammus and Mumu are both also, right?
Yes.
There's just a lot of tanks.
Yeah, there are a lot of
maybe
big...
things will just be big and beefy.
There was a fan made Cho'Gath a long time ago, posted on the main subreddit, and a keyword that they put on him that I absolutely loved was, I think it was like colossal or gargantuan or huge or something. And the thing was that when he leveled up and became huge, he was suddenly a creature that took up 2 slots in your board and needed to be blocked by 2 creatures in order to block him.
That's kind of cool.
And I thought that was so cool.
That's pretty neat. Yeah,
that's pretty neat. All right, I'm into it. I'm into it.
If that's
that
the
would be
thing
cool.
for like Nasus and Renekton, or like all these giant tanks
when they level up or whatever.
Yeah, when they level up, like I think
that could be cool.
Yeah.
That could be cool.
Another thing I think is like, so like, kind of like AOE damage, because I think all of these champions have like big, slightly like Renekton and Nasus both have AOEs.
Yeah, just be like Sandstorm,
yeah,
just like dealing 1 to everything type stuff.
Yeah, like Ember Maiden kind of thing. But like,
I could see that. I could see that. Maybe make our boy Vladimir a little bit more playable.
Yeah, that would be fun.
That would be interesting.
All right. So I think that wraps up the episode. Does anybody have anything else that they want to add on to the end really quick before we get into our closing segment?
Just that I've really been appreciating our Discord. There's been a ton of discussion. And so, if you're not on our Discord, you should be.
Yeah, Discord's been sick.
Shame on you. Discord is a great, application in general. And also, there's tons of Legends of Runeterra themed Discords that are doing great stuff. We will be talking about the Singleton Gauntlet as we do it in our Discord. We didn't have decks ready at this point that we wanted to talk about for this episode, but over the next 3 days, I'm sure that we will be posting the deck lists that we play, how we do with them, and our recommendations in our Discord. So if you want to check that out.
Also, if you are currently in our Discord and you know anyone who is at all interested in this game, please let them know this exists.
Get them in here.
Yeah, get them in here. You guys have seen how much we interact with and enjoy interacting with you guys.
It's honestly been the best part about this whole thing.
Yeah, we do this podcast because we love doing it, and we are willing to talk with all of you and hang out in Discord with all of you because we love to do that.
Sick.
Have more people join us, please.
So thank you to everyone who stuck through this episode with us. As per usual, we will be back with our next episode next week. We're back on our consistent upload schedule, should be for the foreseeable future. That's going to be uploading every Thursday evening Pacific Standard Time. So Thursday evening PST, hopefully that'll be up for your drive to work or whatever on Friday morning. So that is our consistent schedule going forward. Thank you to everyone for listening. We are going to be back next week with our next episode. There will be links to our Discord and Twitter, both of which you should follow and or join in the description of whatever platform you are listening to this on, as well as links to our other platforms where you can find this. With that,
YouTube, Spotify.
Yeah, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, probably wherever you want to find it, it's there. With that, we will see you all on our next episode of Champ Select.